What happened in the final minutes of Keith Green's life? Keith Green, the beloved Christian music singer whose heartfelt songs touched millions, lived a life full of passion, faith, and urgency. But on July 28, 1982, everything changed in an instant. That afternoon, a tragic plane crash cut short not only his career, but also the lives of two of his young children and several friends. The last moments of Keith Green were filled with ordinary details that turned into heartbreaking memories for those left behind. Who exactly was Keith Green before that fateful day? Keith wasn't just a singer. He was a man who saw music as a tool for ministry, not fame. His songs like "O Lord, You're Beautiful" and "There Is a Redeemer" weren't just melodies, they were prayers. Keith and his wife Melody had opened their home to countless people in need, turning their property into a place of community and faith known as Last Days Ministries. Every detail of his life reflected a sense of urgency to live for God with everything he had. And ironically, that urgency mirrored the suddenness with which his life would end. So, what really happened on the day of the crash? On that warm July afternoon, Keith and his family were spending time at their Texas property. A small plane, a Cessna 114, was being used to take their guests on short flights for fun. The aircraft, however, was not designed to carry as many passengers as it did. Keith, with his two children Josiah and Bethany, climbed aboard with friends from their ministry. The pilot, trying to accommodate everyone, allowed too many passengers inside. The plane was dangerously overloaded. Did anyone know something was wrong before takeoff? Yes. Witnesses later recalled that the aircraft seemed sluggish as it lifted from the small airstrip. Within moments, the overloaded plane struggled to gain altitude. The engines strained, the wings dipped, and the aircraft climbed only briefly before losing momentum. Then, in front of horrified onlookers, it plunged into a nearby field and erupted in flames. There were no survivors. Keith was only 28 years old. What was the emotional impact of those final minutes? Think about it. Just seconds before, the cabin must have been filled with nervous excitement. Children giggling, friends chatting, Keith himself perhaps smiling at the joy of community. And yet, in the blink of an eye, all of it was silenced. The sheer terror of that last descent, the realization that something was wrong, the brief fear, and then the sudden end, remains one of the most heartbreaking tragedies in Christian music history. Why did this tragedy shake so many people to their core? Because Keith was more than a performer. He was a leader, a teacher, and a voice of conviction. He often spoke of the fragility of life, urging others to live as if each day could be their last. The haunting part? He lived exactly what he preached. His sudden passing made his words even more piercing. You don't know when your last breath will be. For his fans and followers, it felt like a chilling prophecy fulfilled. How was he remembered after his death? In the days following the crash, thousands of letters poured into Last Days Ministries. His wife, Melody, in her grief, carried forward his mission. His music continued to spread across the world, even more powerful because of the circumstances of his passing. Songs like "There Is a Redeemer" took on new layers of meaning, as if he had left them as a farewell gift. What can we take away from Keith Green's final moments? His story isn't just about tragedy. It's about legacy. It's about a man who poured every ounce of his energy into living a life of purpose. Even though his last minutes were terrifying, the years before them were filled with light, faith, and a relentless call to authenticity. His voice may have been silenced in that fiery crash, but his message echoes louder than ever. Live boldly, love deeply, and never waste a single moment. Keith Green's terrifying final moments remind us of the unpredictability of life. 1 minute, laughter and music, the next, silence. Yet in that silence, his songs still sing. What really happened in those haunting final minutes of Keith Green's life? Keith Green was only 28 years old when his journey came to a shocking and tragic end. He was a man on fire with faith, a musician whose songs carried both urgency and tenderness, and yet, behind the melodies was a deep sense that his time on Earth might be shorter than anyone imagined. But what unfolded in those terrifying last minutes? Was it just another ordinary day at his ministry in Texas? Yes, it began as a normal day. Keith was at his last day's ministry's ranch, a place that had become a haven for countless young believers, searching for meaning. That afternoon, a small private plane arrived. It was there to take some visiting guests, families who were touring the ministry, on a short flight. Keith, excited to connect with people personally, as he always did, offered to join them, bringing along two of his young children, Josiah and Bethany. Why was Keith on that plane in the first place? Because Keith was never distant. He believed in community, in walking alongside those who came to learn from him. That day was no different. He wanted to spend time with the visitors, to make them feel welcomed and loved. But in choosing to board that plane, Keith unknowingly walked straight into the final chapter of his life. What went wrong during the flight? The plane, a small twin-engine aircraft, was dangerously overloaded. It carried 12 people, including Keith and his children, far exceeding. Can you imagine what those first seconds felt like? For Keith, a man of faith, perhaps there was no fear, only a calm awareness. For others, maybe panic set in as the plane struggled to climb, heavy with too many lives aboard. Within moments, the aircraft stalled. Then came the horrifying plunge as the overloaded plane could not sustain its climb. It crashed into a wooded area not far from the ministry grounds, bursting into flames. No one survived. Were those last moments filled with terror or peace? That's a question many still wrestle with. For those who loved him, it's painful to picture Keith in fear. But knowing his heart, some believe that even in those final moments, Keith may have whispered a prayer, holding on to the faith that had defined his every song and sermon. The terrifying crash ended his earthly life, but to his followers, it marked his passage into eternity. How did the world react to the news of Keith's death?